Sometimes the people who save you don't look like you'd expect. Sometimes they have 4 legs and remember kindness better than most folks. Jude Kinney was 62 and done with people. After his wife died and his son stopped writing, he drifted through the desert alone, trusting no one. When he collapsed under the burning sun near Dead Horse Gulch, left behind by a wagon train, it wasn't a person who saved him. It was 2 donkeys, Etta and Boone, animals he'd freed from a cruel trader months before. They stood watch over him, gave him shade, and wouldn't let him die. What happens when the only loyalty left in your life comes from creatures you once set free? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The desert had a way of making a man honest. Out here, under skies so wide they made you feel small, there was no room for pretending. Jude Kinney had learned that lesson the hard way over the past 5 years, ever since the day he buried his wife and walked away from the only home he'd ever known. He wasn't always a drifter. There was a time when Jude Kinney was a name that meant something in these parts. Back in his prime, he'd been one of the best trail scouts in 3 territories. He could read the land like other men read newspapers, finding water where others saw only dust, spotting safe passage through canyons that looked like dead ends. Ranchers paid good money for his knowledge, and wagon trains heading west would wait weeks for his services rather than risk the journey with a lesser guide. That was before Clara died, before Daniel stopped answering his letters, before everything that mattered turned to ash and memory. The sun was starting its descent toward the western horizon, painting the rocks in shades of amber and rust. Jude sat on a flat boulder, his weathered hands turning over a small silver compass. The metal was warm from being in his pocket all day. On the back, worn but still legible, was an engraving. "Find your way home, Clara." She'd given it to him 37 years ago, the day they married. He was 25 then, cocky and sure of himself, convinced he knew every inch of this desert. Clara had laughed at his confidence, her eyes bright with mischief, and pressed the compass into his palm. "For when you forget," she'd said. "Forget what?" he'd asked. "That home isn't a direction. It's a person." He closed his fist around the compass now, feeling the edges bite into his calloused palm. Clara had been right about most things. She usually was. They'd built a good life together on a small ranch near the foothills of the Sangre de Cristo range. Nothing fancy, just a sturdy house, a barn, good grazing land, and a creek that ran year-round. They raised horses, working animals strong and reliable. Clara had a gift for gentling the wild ones, the horses others had given up on. She'd spend hours in the corral, speaking softly, moving slow, until even the most skittish animal would eat from her hand. Daniel was born when Jude was 27, a spring baby arriving with the wildflowers. Jude remembered holding his son for the first time, that tiny, wrinkled face, those unfocused eyes, and feeling a terror he'd never known before. Not the fear of rattlesnakes or flash floods or getting lost in a storm. This was different. This was the fear of failing someone who depended on you completely. For 18 years, he'd thought he was doing right by the boy. Taught him to ride before he could read. Showed him how to track deer, how to find north by the stars, how to survive if he ever got turned around in the backcountry. Hard lessons maybe, but necessary ones. At least, that's what Jude told himself. Daniel grew up strong and capable, with his mother's kindness and his father's practical sense. He worked the ranch, helped with the horses, and never complained about the isolation. When he turned 19, he announced he wanted to study veterinary medicine in Santa Fe. Jude had been proud, though he hadn't known how to say it. Clara had cried happy tears and spent a month sewing new clothes for their son. Daniel came home for visits at first. Then the visits got shorter, less frequent. He met a woman in the city, a schoolteacher named Margaret. They married, and Jude and Clara made the long trip to Santa Fe for the wedding. It was a fine ceremony, and Margaret seemed like a good woman, but Jude felt the distance growing even then, watching his son in his city clothes, hearing him talk about his practice and his plans. Then came the fever. It started with Clara complaining of being tired. She who never tired, who could work dawn to dusk without stopping. Within a week, she was bedridden. Within 2, the doctor from town was shaking his head, saying there was nothing more to be done. Jude sent word to Daniel, but by the time his son arrived, Clara was already gone. The funeral was small. A handful of neighbors, the minister from town, Daniel, and Margaret. Jude stood at the graveside and felt nothing. That should have warned him. The nothing. Like someone had hollowed him out and left only a shell. Daniel stayed a week, trying to help, trying to talk to his father. But Jude had nothing to say. What was there to say? The woman who made home was gone. The compass had lost its meaning. After Daniel left, Jude went through the motions. Fed the horses, mended fences, cooked meals he barely tasted. The house echoed with her absence. Her brush still on the dresser, her apron still hanging by the stove, her voice still in every corner except she wasn't there. And the silence was louder than any sound. 6 months after the funeral, Daniel wrote suggesting Jude sell the ranch and move to Santa Fe, live with them. They had room. It would be good to be near family. Jude never answered that letter. Instead, he sold the ranch to a young couple from Kansas. They had dreams in their eyes, the same dreams he and Clara had once carried. He sold the horses too, all except his gelding, Rusty, a chestnut with a white blaze who'd been with him for 15 years. He packed what fit in his saddlebags, left the rest, and rode away without looking back. That was 5 years ago. Since then, Jude had wandered. No destination, no purpose. He'd pick up work when he needed money, guide wealthy hunters, help round up stray cattle, repair tack for ranchers. Never stayed long. Couldn't bear it. People asked questions. People tried to be kind. People reminded him of everything he'd lost. The desert didn't ask questions. The desert didn't offer sympathy. The desert just was, and that suited him fine. He'd been drifting through the territories south of New Mexico when he first saw the donkeys. It was in a nothing town called Bitter Creek, just a trading post, a saloon, and a livery stable at the junction of 2 wagon roads. Jude had stopped to resupply, planning to move on by morning. The trading post was run by a man named Silas Polk, a red-faced, thick-necked brute who dealt in everything from whiskey to animal hides. Behind the post, Polk kept a small corral where he traded livestock, mules, horses, the occasional longhorn, and donkeys. Jude noticed them right away. 2 gray donkeys, smaller than mules, standing close together in the corner of the corral. They were in rough shape, ribs showing, coats dull, hooves overgrown. But it was the way they held themselves that caught his attention. Alert, wary, still proud despite everything. Those for sale? Jude had asked, nodding toward the donkeys. Polk had laughed, a harsh sound like gravel in a bucket. Those stubborn bastards? You want 'em, make me an offer. Worthless as they are, why worthless? Won't work. Won't follow commands. The Jenny tried to bite me this morning, and the Jack kicked my assistant yesterday. Got 'em cheap off a prospector who was heading back east. Figured I could break 'em, but they're more trouble than they're worth. Jude watched the donkeys. They were watching him too, dark eyes, intelligent and measuring. The Jenny had a notch in her left ear. The Jack had a scar across his shoulder. How do you treat them? Jude asked. Polk shrugged. Same as any stubborn animal, firm hand. They learn or they don't eat. That night Jude couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about those donkeys, about the intelligence in their eyes, about the scars on their bodies, about Clara, who'd always said you could judge a man by how he treated animals. Around midnight he got up, pulled on his boots and walked to Polk's corral. The moon was bright enough to see by. The donkeys were lying down, pressed against each other for warmth. When Jude approached, they scrambled to their feet, ready to run or fight. Easy now, Jude said softly. I'm not here to hurt you. He spent an hour there, just sitting on the fence rail, talking to them in the same gentle voice Clara had used with frightened horses, told them about the ranch, about Clara, about being alone. The donkeys listened, ears swiveling toward him, gradually relaxing. Before he left, Jude opened the gate. You want to stay here and get beaten, that's your choice, he said. But if you want to try something different, I'll be heading west at first light. Can't promise much. Don't even know where I'm going. But I won't hurt you, and I won't starve you, and I won't make you do anything you don't want to do. He left the gate open and went back to his bedroll. At dawn, when Jude saddled Rusty and prepared to leave, the two donkeys were standing at the edge of the town, waiting. They kept their distance, maybe 50 yards back, but when Jude rode out, they followed. He stopped after a mile and looked back at them. "You coming or not?" The Jenny took a few steps forward. The Jack followed. They stopped about 20 yards away. "All right then," Jude said. "If you're coming, you need names. Can't just call you, 'Hey, you.'" He thought about it for a moment. The Jenny had that same proud bearing Clara's mother had possessed. Her name had been Henrietta, though everyone called her Etta. "You're Etta," he told the Jenny. The Jack made him think of Daniel Boone, the old frontiersman. Stubborn, independent, good at surviving, and you're Boone. The donkeys watched him with their dark, knowing eyes. Then Etta brayed, a sound that was almost like agreement, and Boone tossed his head. They followed Jude for 3 days, always keeping that same distance. He'd stop to make camp, and they'd stop too, grazing nearby but never coming close. He'd leave out grain for them, and they'd eat it after he'd moved away. Gradually, over weeks, the distance closed. 50 yards became 30, 30 became 20, 20 became 10. By the time a month had passed, Etta and Boone would sleep near his campfire. By 2 months, they'd eat from his hand. They never forgot the cruelty they'd known, always a little skittish, always watching for danger. But they'd chosen Jude, chosen to trust him, and that meant something. Now, sitting on this boulder with the sun painting the desert gold, Jude pulled the compass from his pocket again. "Find your way home." He still carried it, still looked at it every day, but he didn't know what home meant anymore. Daniel had stopped responding to his letters 2 years ago. Jude didn't blame him. What kind of father disappears into the desert and doesn't even try to stay in touch? A fly landed on his wrist. He brushed it away. Somewhere behind him he heard the soft sound of hooves on stone. Etta and Boone, grazing on the sparse desert grass, never far from where he sat. They'd become his companions these past months, the only living things he spent time with. They didn't judge him, didn't ask him to be anything other than what he was. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that had to be enough. The sun touched the horizon, and Jude stood tucking the compass back into his pocket. Time to make camp. Tomorrow he'd head northwest, toward the mountains. There was supposed to be good water up that way, and the desert summer was coming on hot, and he didn't know that tomorrow would change. Everything didn't know that sometimes the kindness you show comes back to you when you need it. Most didn't know that. The 2 donkeys he'd freed from a cruel man's corral would soon be the only reason he was still breathing. The desert keeps its secrets until it's ready to reveal them. 3 months had passed since that evening with the compass. Summer had come on strong and merciless, the kind of heat that shimmered up from the rocks and made the horizon dance with false water. Jude had led Etta and Boone deeper into the territory he knew best, following old trails from his scouting days, avoiding towns and people as much as possible. They were somewhere west of Dead Horse Gulch, tracking along the base of a mesa formation, when Jude noticed the problem. He'd taken a drink from his canteen that morning and heard an unfamiliar sound, a faint trickle that shouldn't have been there. He'd stopped, examined the canteen, and found a crack in the leather wrap where it had split along the seam. Not a huge crack, but enough that water was seeping out with every movement. He cursed softly. The canteen was old, same one he'd carried for 20 years. The leather had finally given out. He tried patching it with a strip of rawhide from his saddlebag, wrapping it tight, but the water still leaked through. Not fast, but steady. A slow drip that meant his water supply was on borrowed time. Jude studied the landscape. According to his memory and his maps, there should be a reliable spring about 15 miles northwest, near a rock formation called the Three Sisters. 15 miles. With the temperature already climbing toward what felt like 100 degrees and his water slowly disappearing, that 15 miles had just become the most important distance in his life. "We need to move," he said to Rusty, patting the gelding's neck. The horse had been flagging in the heat, head low, steps heavy. Behind them, Etta and Boone walked with their ears drooping, seeking what little shade they could find. They walked through the morning, and the heat built like a physical weight. Jude took small sips from the leaking canteen, trying to conserve what remained. By noon the leather was nearly dry. By early afternoon it was empty. His throat was already raw, his lips cracking. He'd been through rough conditions before, knew the signs of dehydration, knew he was in trouble. The three sisters still looked far away, shimmering in the heat haze. Maybe 10 miles, maybe more. Distance was hard to judge when the air itself seemed to bend the light. Rusty stumbled. The horse caught himself, but it was a warning sign. Jude dismounted, not wanting to add his weight to the animal's burden. Behind them, Etta and Boone had slowed their pace, tongues lolling, breath coming in short pants. They needed water, all of them. The sun was a white-hot coin burning overhead when Jude spotted something on the trail ahead. Dust. A lot of it. He stopped, shaded his eyes, and made out the shapes of wagons. A small train, maybe 4 or 5 wagons, heading east. Relief flooded through him. Wagon trains always carried extra water. He'd just need enough to make it to the spring. He could trade, offer to guide them if they needed it, do whatever it took. He waited at the side of the trail as the wagons approached. The lead wagon was driven by a man in his 40s, broad-shouldered, with a thick beard and suspicious eyes. Behind him came 3 more wagons, families by the look of it, women and children peering out from under canvas covers. "Afternoon," Jude called out, raising a hand in greeting. His voice came out rougher than he intended. The lead driver pulled his team to a halt. The other wagons stopped behind him. Nobody smiled. Nobody waved back. "What do you want?" The driver asked. "Water," Jude said simply. "My canteen split. I can trade for it or work for it. Just need enough to make it to the next spring." The driver looked at Jude, then at Rusty, then at the 2 donkeys standing behind them. His expression remained hard. "We don't have water to spare," he said. Jude blinked, not quite believing what he'd heard. "I'm not asking for much. A couple of quarts. I'll pay fair. Can't help you." The driver started to snap the reins. "Wait." Jude stepped forward. "Please, I know this territory. I used to scout these trails. I can tell you the safest route east, where the water is, where to avoid. We've got our own maps." The driver's voice was cold. "And we've heard about men like you, drifters, beggars. Some of them rob wagons, claim they need help, then turn on decent folk when their guard is down." "I'm not a thief," Jude said, anger rising despite his thirst. "I'm just asking for basic human decency." A woman in the second wagon leaned out. "Thomas, surely we could spare a little water." "Look at him. Stay out of this, Helen," Thomas snapped. "We've got children to think about and a long road ahead. Can't help every down-on-his-luck drifter we meet." Jude looked at the faces watching him from the wagons. Some looked sympathetic. Most looked scared or indifferent. These were people who'd learned to be suspicious, to protect their own first. "There's a spring about 10 miles northwest," Jude said, his voice steady despite the anger and desperation clawing at his chest. "Called Three Sisters. Good water year-round. If you're heading east, you'll want to avoid Dead Horse Gulch after nightfall. Flash floods this time of year. There's a better route 2 miles south that adds a day but keeps you safe." Thomas stared at him for a moment, then nodded once. "Obliged for the information." He snapped the reins. The wagon lurched forward. One by one, the other wagons followed. Jude stood there watching them pass. A young girl in the last wagon looked back at him, her face pressed against the canvas. Then she too was gone, and there was nothing but dust hanging in the still air. Jude stood there for a long moment, fists clenched, watching the wagons disappear into the heat shimmer. Then he turned and looked at his animals. Rusty's head hung low. Etta and Boone were panting heavily. "All right," he said, his voice hoarse. "We keep moving." They walked. The sun climbed higher, impossibly hot. Jude's thoughts began to fragment. He kept thinking about Clara, about cool water from the creek that ran past their house, about the way she'd bring him water when he came in from working. The tin cup beaded with condensation, so cold it made his teeth ache. His vision blurred. He stumbled, caught himself. Stumbled again. The Three Sisters wavered in the distance, 3 rock pillars reaching toward the sky. They looked close. They looked impossibly far away. He couldn't tell any more. Time became elastic, stretching and contracting. He was walking. Then he was on his knees. Then he was walking again. Rusty's reins were in his hand. Then they weren't. Then they were again. Somewhere in the back of his mind he knew this was bad. Knew he was in real danger. But the thoughts came slow, like honey in winter, and he couldn't quite grasp them before they slipped away. He thought about Daniel. Should have answered that letter. Should have gone to Santa Fe. Should have been a better father, a better grandfather to the child he'd never met. Should have done a lot of things differently. The ground came up to meet him. He didn't remember falling, but suddenly he was on his knees, hands pressed against stone so hot it burned his palms. He tried to stand. His legs wouldn't cooperate. Behind him he heard a sound. Rusty whinnying. The horse was in trouble too. They were all in trouble. Jude looked up at the sky, brilliant blue and empty. No clouds, no mercy. Just endless burning light. "I'm sorry," he said, though he didn't know who he was talking to. Clara, maybe, Daniel, the animals he'd led into this wasteland. He fell forward. His cheek pressed against the desert floor, and the heat was like a brand. He should move, should get up, should do something, but his body wouldn't listen anymore. The last thing he remembered clearly was the taste of dust in his mouth and the sound of the wind moving across the empty land. Then even that faded, and there was nothing but the overwhelming, suffocating heat. Somewhere in the darkness behind his closed eyes, he felt a kind of peace. This was it then. This was how it ended. Not bad as endings go. Alone in the desert, the way he'd been living. At least it was honest. At least it was clean. He didn't see the two shapes that appeared on the horizon, moving toward him with purpose. Didn't hear the familiar sound of hooves on stone. Didn't feel the shadow that fell across his burning face as two donkeys he'd once freed from a cruel man's corral came to stand over him, blocking the merciless sun with their own bodies. Consciousness slipped away like water through cracked leather, and Jude Kinney surrendered to the darkness. Certain he would never wake again. He was 7 years old, standing in the corral, looking up at the bay mare that seemed as tall as a mountain. The horse snorted, and young Daniel took a step back, bumping into his father's legs. "She's too big, Papa," Daniel said, his voice small. "She's just right," Jude heard himself say, though the voice seemed to come from far away. "You're going to learn on her. Her name is Molly, and she's the gentlest horse we've got." But the memory was wrong somehow. The corral kept shifting, the fence posts melting in heat that shouldn't have been there. Daniel's face blurred and sharpened, blurred and sharpened. Was this real? Had this happened? Jude tried to open his eyes. The light was too bright, stabbing into his skull like a blade. He closed them again, retreating into the darkness where the memories waited. Clara was there too, leaning on the corral fence, watching them. "Be patient with him, Jude," she said. "He's scared. Fear is natural," Jude replied. "But we can't let it stop us." "Daniel, come here. Put your hand on her neck. Feel how warm she is? She's just an animal, same as you and me. Nothing to be afraid of." Daniel had reached out with a trembling hand, touched the mare's shoulder. The horse stood perfectly still, as if she understood how important this moment was. The memory shattered. Pain brought Jude back to something like consciousness. His head felt like it was splitting open. His skin was on fire. His tongue was thick and useless in his mouth. He tried to open his eyes again. This time he managed to keep them open just a crack. Shapes, light and shadow. Something was blocking the sun. No, not something. Two somethings. Standing over him, a sound, low and familiar. A bray, soft and concerned. Etta. The realization came slowly, fighting through the fog in his mind. The donkeys. They were here. They were standing over him, their bodies creating a patch of shade that kept the killing sun off his face. He tried to speak. Nothing came out but a croak. One of the shapes moved. A nose pressed against his cheek, gentle, checking if he was alive. Then a rough tongue licked his face, and he would have laughed if he'd had the strength. The darkness pulled at him again. He fought it, knowing somehow that if he let go completely, he might not come back. But the pull was strong, and he was so tired. Daniel was 8 now, or was he 9? The memory jumped forward, skipping time. They were out on the range, checking the fence line. Daniel sat on Molly, comfortable now, no longer afraid. The boy had his father's seat, his mother's easy way with animals. "Papa, why did you become a scout?" Daniel asked. Jude had thought about the question. They were stopped near a creek, letting the horses drink. "Because I needed to know what was beyond the next hill," he said. "Couldn't stand being fenced in. Your mother cured me of some of that, gave me a reason to stay put. But the land still calls to me sometimes. Will it call to me too?" Daniel's voice was uncertain. "Maybe, maybe not. You might be different." "That's all right. A man has to find his own way. But I didn't mean that," Jude thought now, trapped somewhere between memory and present. "I meant it, but I didn't want you to go. Didn't want you to find a way that took you so far from me that we couldn't find our way back to each other." A sound pulled him back again. Movement nearby. The donkeys shifting position as the sun moved across the sky, adjusting their stance to keep him in the shade. How long had he been lying here? Hours, days. He managed to open his eyes fully this time. The world swam, doubled, then slowly resolved. He was lying on his side in the dirt. Etta stood with her body parallel to the sun, casting her shadow over him. Boone was positioned behind her, his shadow filling in the gaps. They'd saved him. Were still saving him. Jude tried to move. His arms responded barely. He managed to shift onto his back. The movement cost him, and darkness rushed in at the edges of his vision. He lay still, panting, waiting for the world to steady. Time passed. The sun moved. The donkeys moved with it, patient sentinels. In the fever, in the delirium, Daniel was 12, learning to track. Jude was teaching him to read signs in the dirt. The print of a deer, the drag mark of a snake. The way broken grass indicated which direction something had traveled. "You have to see what's there, not what you think should be there," Jude explained. "Look at this print. What do you see? A horse? Good, but what else? Look at the depth, the shape. What can you tell me?" Daniel studied it. "It's deeper on one side." The horse was limping. Pride swelled in Jude's chest. "That's right, good eye. Now, if you were tracking this horse, what would you know? That it's injured, that it'll be moving slower, that it might stop to rest more often. And what does that tell you about the rider?" Daniel thought hard. "That they're in trouble, that they might need help." Jude had smiled then. "You're going to be better at this than I am, son." But the memory curdled, turned bitter. "I taught you to track, taught you to see what was there. But I never saw what was there between us. Never saw how my grief was pushing you away. Never saw that you needed something from me I didn't know how to give." Something wet touched his lips. Jude's eyes flew open. Boone was standing over him, nose close to his face. The donkey pulled back, then lowered his head again. On the donkey's muzzle, there was moisture. Boone had found water somewhere and was trying to show him. Jude tried to sit up, failed, tried again. This time he made it to his elbows, then to a sitting position. The world spun violently. He closed his eyes, breathed through his nose, waited. When he opened them again, Boone was walking away, looking back, clearly wanting Jude to follow. Etta remained close, as if ready to support him if he fell. Water. There was water nearby. The thought cut through the fog like a knife. Water. He needed water. The animals had found water. Using Etta's solid body for support, Jude managed to get to his knees. The effort left him shaking, gasping. He stayed there for a long moment, forehead pressed against the donkey's dusty coat, drawing strength from her warmth, her patience. One more push. He had to make one more push. With Etta standing firm beside him, Jude struggled to his feet, stood swaying, the world tilting dangerously. But he was upright. He was moving. Boone brayed encouragement from up ahead, still looking back. Jude took a step, another. His legs were weak as a newborn foal's, but they held. Etta walked beside him, close enough to lean on if he needed. Behind them, Rusty followed, the horse drawn by the promise of water. They moved across the desert floor, a slow, shuffling procession. The sun was lower now, Jude realized dimly. Afternoon, maybe late afternoon. He'd been unconscious for hours. Boone led them around a tumble of rocks. Through a narrow gap, and there, blessed, impossible, real, was a small seep spring. Just a trickle of water pooling in a depression in the rock. But it was water. Clear and cool. Jude fell to his knees at the edge of the pool. cupped his hands, brought the water to his cracked lips, and drank. It was the sweetest thing he'd ever tasted, better than wine, better than anything. He drank slowly, forcing himself not to gulp, knowing his body couldn't handle too much at once. Around him, Etta, Boone, and Rusty drank too, all of them crowded around this tiny miracle of survival. When he'd drunk his fill, Jude sat back against the rocks, watching the three animals. They'd stayed. They'd protected him. They'd found water. They'd saved his life. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice raw and broken. "Thank you." Etta looked at him with her dark, knowing eyes. In them, he saw no judgment, no resentment for the danger he'd led them into. Just acceptance, just presence. For the first time in 5 years, Jude Kinney felt something crack open inside his chest, the hard shell he'd built around his heart, keeping everything out, keeping everything in. A crack, small but real, and through it flowed something he'd forgotten how to feel: gratitude, connection, purpose. He wasn't alone. These creatures had chosen him, had stood by him, had refused to let him die. Maybe, just maybe, he owed them the same loyalty. Maybe it was time to stop drifting. Maybe it was time to find a way home. Jude spent the rest of that day and all of the next one at the seep spring, recovering. His body had taken a beating from the heat and dehydration, and he knew better than to push too hard too soon. He'd seen men die from drinking too much water too fast after going without, or from trying to travel before their strength returned. So he rested. Drank small amounts regularly, ate some of the jerky from his pack, though his stomach rebelled at first. Let the animals graze on what sparse vegetation grew near the water. And thought the thinking was the hardest part. For 5 years, he'd avoided thinking too deeply about anything. Kept moving, kept busy, kept his mind on the immediate tasks of survival. But now, with nothing to do but sit and recover, the thoughts came whether he wanted them or not. Those donkeys had saved his life. Not accidentally, not coincidentally. They'd made a choice. When he'd collapsed, they could have kept moving, could have found this water on their own and left him to the buzzards. But they hadn't. They'd stood over him, protecting him, then led him to safety. Why? The only answer he could come up with was the one he'd been avoiding, because he'd done the same for them once. He'd seen them suffering and made a choice, opened a gate, given them freedom. And somehow, in whatever way animals understand these things, they remembered. They returned kindness with kindness. It was a simple transaction, really. But it felt profound, sitting there in the shadow of the rocks, watching Etta and Boone rest near each other, their companionship easy and uncomplicated. They didn't hold grudges, didn't overthink things. They just lived moment to moment, responding to the world as it came. When had he lost that ability? On the second morning, Jude felt strong enough to take stock of his situation. His canteen was ruined beyond repair. His water supply depended entirely on finding sources like this seep. His food stores were getting low. Rusty was in better shape after 2 days of rest and water, but the horse was 16 years old and showing it. Etta and Boone seemed fine, hardy creatures that they were, already back to their alert, watchful selves. He pulled out his old trail map, the one he'd carried since his scouting days. The paper was worn soft as cloth, the creases threatening to tear. But his handwritten notes were still legible. A younger Jude's observations about water sources, safe camps, dangerous passages. He traced a finger along the route, calculating. They were about 15 miles southeast of where he'd intended to end up, the Three Sisters, where he'd been heading when the wagon train refused him water. But that didn't matter now. What mattered was the nearest town. His finger stopped on a name, Redemption Springs. He remembered the place, though he hadn't been there in at least a decade. It was a decent-sized town, by territory standards, built around a reliable water source. Had a doctor, a general store, a livery. Everything a man would need. According to his calculations and the landmarks he could see, Redemption Springs was about 15 miles northwest of their current position. 2 days easy travel, maybe a day and a half if they pushed. But he wasn't pushing. Not after what had just happened. He looked at his animals. "What do you think? Ready to try for civilization?" Etta flicked her ears toward him. Boone snorted and went back to nibbling at a bit of grass. I'll take that as a yes. They left that afternoon, moving slowly, stopping frequently. Jude kept a close eye on everyone, watching for signs of fatigue or distress. But the rest and water had done wonders. Even Rusty moved with a bit more spring in his step. As they walked, Jude found himself talking to the animals. It was something he'd done occasionally before, but now it felt different, more intentional. More like actual conversation, even if only one side could use words. I used to scout these trails, he told them. Long time ago, before you were born, before I got old and stupid, I knew every waterhole, every safe passage, every place where danger liked to hide. Boone brayed, as if commenting, "You think I'm bragging? Maybe I am, but it's true. I was good at what I did. People trusted me to get them where they needed to go, safely." He paused, adjusting his hat against the lowering sun. Clara was the one who convinced me to settle down. Said I'd get myself killed out here eventually, and she wasn't willing to be a widow before she was a wife. So we built the ranch. I still took scouting jobs sometimes, but I always came home. Home was the important part. Etta moved closer, walking almost beside him now. Jude reached out and rested a hand on her shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of her, the rhythm of her steps. After she died, I forgot what home meant. Thought it was the place, the house, the land. When I sold all that, I figured I'd sold home too. But Clara tried to tell me different, didn't she? That compass she gave me with those words. Home isn't a direction. It's a person. He was quiet for a while, just walking, his hand still on Etta's shoulder. Maybe it's more than a person, though. Maybe it's any connection that matters. Any relationship where you show up for each other, where you take care of each other, where you remember kindness and return it. Boone had moved up on his other side. Rusty plodded behind them. They were a group, a small herd, looking after each other. That night, they camped in a sheltered spot between two rock formations. Jude built a small fire, more for light and comfort than warmth, and shared his dwindling, jerky supply with the animals. Etta and Boone weren't natural meat eaters, but they'd learned to accept the dried beef as a treat. Something special. When we get to town, Jude said, watching the flames, I'll need to figure out what comes next. Can't just keep drifting. That nearly got us all killed. He thought about his son, about the letter he'd never answered, about the grandchild he'd never met. Was it too late to try again? To reach out and admit he'd been wrong to disappear? Maybe, maybe not. But he owed it to Daniel to try. Owed it to these animals who'd saved him. Owed it to Clara's memory. We'll get supplies in Redemption Springs, he continued, talking as much to himself as to his companions. Then maybe I'll send another letter. Try to explain, try to make things right. Or at least try to start making things right. Etta lay down near the fire, and Boone settled beside her. Rusty stood nearby, hip-shot, dozing on his feet the way old horses do. Jude watched them, feeling that same crack in his chest widen a little more. For 5 years, he'd been running from pain by running from connection. But these animals had shown him something important. Connection was what saved you. Connection was what gave you a reason to keep going. Connection was home. The fire burned low. Jude wrapped himself in his blanket and lay down, using his saddle as a pillow. The stars wheeled overhead, endless and bright. Somewhere out there, Daniel was living his life, maybe looking at these same stars, maybe thinking about his father. Or maybe not. Either way, Jude was going to try. Morning came with the slow lightening of the eastern sky. Jude woke stiff and sore, but better than he'd been. They ate a small breakfast, the last of the jerky for him, grazing for the animals, and then continued northwest. The land began to change as they traveled. The flat desert gave way to rolling hills, and there were more plants, more signs of water somewhere underground. By midday of the second day, Jude could see buildings in the distance. Redemption Springs. The town had grown since he'd last seen it. There were more buildings, more people visible on the main street. He could make out the church steeple, the peaked roof of what looked like a new hotel, the sprawl of corrals and outbuildings that meant the town was prospering. Jude stopped on a small rise overlooking the town. His animals stopped with him. Well, he said, there it is, civilization, or close to it. He felt nervous, and that surprised him. He'd been avoiding people for so long that the thought of being around them again felt strange, almost threatening. But he pushed the feeling down. He needed supplies, needed to figure out his next steps. And maybe, just maybe, he needed to start learning how to be around people again. "Let's go," he said, and started down the slope. As they approached the outskirts of town, a few people stopped to stare. A ragged old man leading a tired horse, followed by 2 donkeys. They probably made quite a sight. Jude kept his head up, his back straight. He'd been through too much these past few days to feel ashamed of how he looked. He was alive. His animals were alive. That was what mattered. The main street was wider than he remembered, lined with wooden sidewalks and false front buildings. A sign pointing right read, "Doctor." Another pointing left read, "General Store and Post Office." Doctor first, Jude decided. Get himself checked over. Make sure the dehydration hadn't done any lasting damage. Then supplies. Then he'd figure out what came next. He tied Rusty to a hitching post outside the doctor's office. Etta and Boone stood nearby, watching him with those patient, knowing eyes. "I'll be back," he told them. "You wait here. I'll bring you water." He pushed open the door to the doctor's office and stepped inside, and didn't know yet that this moment, walking into this building in this town, was the beginning of something new. Something that would give him back the purpose he'd lost when Clara died. Sometimes the path forward only reveals itself one step at a time. Jude was ready to take the next step. The doctor's office smelled like carbolic acid and old paper. A bell above the door chimed as Jude entered, and a voice called out from a back room, "Be with you in a moment." Jude stood in the waiting area, feeling out of place. There were chairs against one wall, a small table with old newspapers, and a coat rack. Everything was clean and orderly, the kind of order that comes from someone who takes pride in their work. A man emerged from the back room, wiping his hands on a towel. He was in his 50s, Jude guessed, with silver hair, wire-rimmed spectacles, and the kind of steady gaze that put people at ease. He took one look at Jude, and his expression shifted from professional courtesy to genuine concern. "Good Lord, man. When's the last time you saw a doctor?" "Been a while," Jude admitted. "I can tell. Come on back. Let's have a look at you." The doctor gestured toward the examination room. "I'm Dr. Benjamin Brennan, by the way. Most folks call me Doc. Jude Kinney." Doc Brennan led him into a room with an examination table, cabinets full of medical supplies, and a window that let in good light. He had Jude sit on the table and began his examination, checking his eyes, his pulse, listening to his breathing. "Dehydration," Doc said after a few minutes. "Bad sunburn. You're lucky you didn't cook your brain in your skull." "What happened?" Jude told him about the cracked canteen, the failed attempt to reach the spring, the wagon train that refused him water. Doc's expression darkened as he listened. "Thomas Garrett's train," Doc said. "They came through here 2 days ago. Uncharitable bunch. I'm sorry you ran into them." "I survived. Barely, from the look of you." Doc pulled out a jar of salve and began applying it to Jude's sunburned face and neck. The cool sensation was a relief. "You said you collapsed near Dead Horse Gulch. That's rough country." "How'd you make it here?" Jude hesitated, then said, "I had help. 2 donkeys. They stood over me, kept the sun off, led me to water." Doc paused in his ministrations, looking at Jude with interest. "The 2 outside? The grey ones?" "That's them. Etta and Boone. Smart animals, donkeys. Tougher than horses, better memory. I've heard stories of them doing things like that, protecting their owners, finding help. Never seen it myself, though." Doc went back to applying the salve. "You must have treated them well for them to return the favor." "I freed them from a man who was beating them." Doc nodded, as if that explained everything. "Animals remember kindness, sometimes better than people do." He finished with the salve and stepped back. "You need to rest, drink plenty of water, and stay out of the sun for a few days. I can give you some tincture for the headache you're probably having. Other than that, time and care will do the rest." "Much obliged," Jude said. "What do I owe you?" "Let's call it $2 for the exam and the salve." Jude reached into his pocket and counted out the coins. His funds were getting low. He'd need to find work soon if he planned to stay anywhere for more than a few days. As if reading his thoughts, Doc said, "You planning to stay in Redemption Springs? Or just passing through?" "Don't know yet," Jude admitted. "Haven't decided." Doc studied him for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. "Can I ask what you do for a living? Before you became a drifter, I mean." "No offense intended." "Trail scout. Worked all over these territories. Before that, I had a ranch." "A scout." Doc's eyes lit up with interest. "So you know the land around here?" "Better than most. And you're good with animals, obviously." Doc leaned against the examination table, crossing his arms. "There's a place on the edge of town. Old Prospector Station, been abandoned for a couple years now. Fellow named Garrett built it. Different Garrett from the wagon train leader, but he died without family, and the place just sits there. It's not much, but it's got good bones. 4 walls, a roof that mostly doesn't leak, and a decent-sized corral." Jude listened, wondering where this was going. "Town owns it now," Doc continued. "We've been trying to figure out what to do with it. Some want to tear it down, some want to sell it, but nobody's come forward with a good offer. Point is, if a man wanted to stay there, fix it up a bit, maybe make himself useful around town, I don't think anyone would object. Might even be able to arrange it official-like with the town council." "Why are you telling me this?" Doc shrugged. "Call it intuition. You seem like a man who's lost his way, but might be ready to find it again. And this town could use someone with your skills. We get travelers through here all the time, people who need guides or information about the trails. Plus someone who knows animals like you do. Well, that's a valuable thing." Jude felt something stir in his chest. "Interest, maybe, or possibility. I'd want to see it first." "Of course. I can take you there after I close up here. Say in an hour?" "All right." Jude paid for his treatment and went back outside. Etta and Boone were exactly where he'd left them, patient as statues. A few townspeople had gathered at a distance, watching the donkeys with curiosity. When Jude appeared, most of them dispersed, but one older woman approached, smiling. "May I pet them?" she asked. Jude looked at his donkeys. "They're friendly enough, but they've been mistreated before." "Go slow." The woman approached Etta carefully, extending her hand palm down for the donkey to sniff. After a moment, Etta allowed herself to be petted. The woman's smile widened. "What sweet creatures. We don't see many donkeys around here." "They saved my life," Jude said simply. The woman looked at him with interest, then at the donkeys with new respect. "Then they're very special indeed." She moved on, and Jude found a trough where he let the animals drink. Rusty drank long and deep, and the donkeys followed suit. Jude filled his ruined canteen anyway, just to have water accessible even if it leaked. He found a bench in the shade and sat, waiting for Doc Brennan. The town moved around him, people going about their business, wagons rolling past, children playing in the street. Normal life. The kind of life he'd walked away from 5 years ago. Could he do this? Could he stay in one place again? The thought made him anxious, but it also made him curious. What would it be like to have a place again? Not a ranch, not a family home, but something. A base. A purpose. An hour later, Doc Brennan emerged from his office, locking the door behind him. "Ready?" They walked through town, Jude leading Rusty, the donkeys following behind. People nodded to Doc as they passed, and he returned the greetings warmly. He seemed to be well-liked here, respected. "I came to Redemption Springs about 15 years ago," Doc explained as they walked. "After my wife died. Couldn't stay in the city anymore, too many memories. Figured a small town could use a doctor, and I needed somewhere to start over. Best decision I ever made." Jude heard the echo of his own story in Doc's words. "You ever regret leaving?" "Sometimes, but mostly no. Starting over isn't about running away from the past. It's about finding a way to live with it, to honor it without being trapped by it." They reached the edge of town where the buildings thinned out. Doc pointed to a structure about 100 yards off the main road. "That's it. The Prospector's Station." It was bigger than Jude expected. A main building with a covered porch, a separate barn or stable, and a large corral with split-rail fencing. The wood was weathered but solid. A few windows were broken. The whole place had an air of sad abandonment, but Jude could see the potential. The location was good. close enough to town for convenience, far enough for privacy. The corral could hold a dozen animals easily. The barn looked sound. Mind if I look around? Jude asked. Help yourself. Jude walked the property slowly, assessing everything with the critical eye of someone who'd built and maintained a ranch for years. The main building needed work, some boards replaced, the windows fixed, a good cleaning. The barn was in better shape, just needing minor repairs. The corral fence was sturdy, just a few rails that needed replacing. He could do this, all of it. With time and effort, he could make this place functional again. More than that, he could make it a home. Not for himself necessarily. He wasn't sure he deserved that yet. But for animals, for creatures like Etta and Boone, who needed a safe place, a refuge from cruelty and hard use, the idea took root, growing stronger with each passing moment. A place where working animals could rest, where injured or abused animals could recover, where no creature got left behind or forgotten. Doc joined him in the corral. What do you think? I think, Jude said slowly, pulling out Clara's compass and running his thumb over the engraving. I think I might have just found my way home. Doc smiled. Then let's go talk to the town council. The town council met 2 days later in the church hall. 6 members, including Doc Brennan, sat at a long table while Jude stood before them, hat in his hands, explaining his proposal. He kept it simple. He had experience with animals and land management. The prospector's station was sitting empty, deteriorating. He could fix it up, maintain it, and in exchange for use of the property, he'd provide services to the town. Guide work, animal care, general expertise about the territory. There were questions. Where was he from? Why had he been drifting? What were his intentions long-term? Jude answered honestly. He told them about Clara's death, about losing his way, about the donkeys saving his life. He told them he was looking for a purpose again, a reason to settle down. The council members conferred quietly. Finally, the head councilman, a banker named Stevens, spoke. We'll grant you a 1-year lease on the property, rent-free, with an option to purchase at a fair price if you're still here after that year and the place is in good order. But understand, Mr. Kinney, we're a small town. We look after each other. If there's trouble, if you bring problems, I won't, Jude said firmly. I just want a quiet place to do some good. Stevens nodded. Then we have an agreement. By that afternoon, Jude had moved what little he owned into the main building of the prospector station. It wasn't much, his bedroll, his saddlebags, a few possessions. But it was enough. He spent the first evening just sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, with Etta and Boone grazing in the corral and Rusty resting in the barn. This was his now. For at least a year, maybe longer. That night, unable to sleep, Jude lit a lamp and went through his saddlebags more carefully than he had in years. At the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, he found something he'd almost forgotten, Clara's journal. She'd kept it from the first year of their marriage until the year before she died. He'd packed it when he left the ranch, though he couldn't have said why. Couldn't bring himself to read it. Now, with the lamp casting warm light across the pages, he opened it. The first entries were from a young woman excited about her new life. Clara wrote about learning to run the ranch, about her hopes and dreams, about watching Jude work and thinking how lucky she was. Jude's throat tightened reading those early pages. He skipped forward, looking at entries from later years. There were observations about Daniel growing up, about hard winters and good harvests, about the daily rhythms of ranch life. Then he found an entry from the last year Clara was alive, and the words hit him like a physical blow. Jude is so strong, she'd written, so good at everything he does. But I worry about him. He carries things alone, won't share his burdens. What will happen to him when I'm gone? Will he let Daniel help him? Will he let anyone in? Or will he close up like a fist and drift away from everything that matters? Jude had to stop reading, set the journal down, walked out onto the porch and stood there breathing hard, fighting tears. She'd known. Clara had known exactly what would happen, and it had happened anyway. He'd closed up. He'd drifted away. He'd become exactly what she'd feared, but maybe it wasn't too late to prove her wrong. to show her, wherever she was, that he could learn, could change, could open up again. He went back inside, found paper and a pencil, and began to write. "Dear Daniel," he started, then stopped. Crossed it out. Started again. "Son, I don't know if you'll read this or throw it away. Both would be fair. I've been a poor father these past years. Poor in all the ways that matter. You offered me a place with your family, and I never answered. That was wrong of me. Cruel even, though I didn't mean it that way." He paused, thinking about what to say next. "I nearly died a couple weeks ago. Would have, except for 2 donkeys I freed from a bad situation. They remembered kindness and returned it. Made me think about who I've become, and whether your mother would recognize me anymore. I'm in a town called Redemption Springs now. Got a place I'm fixing up. Might turn it into a sanctuary for working animals that need rest or care. It's not much, but it's a start. A purpose. What I'm trying to say is I'm sorry for disappearing, for not being there, for letting grief turn me into someone who couldn't see what mattered. If you're willing, I'd like to try again. To be part of your life, and Margaret's, and your daughter's if she'll have me. I understand if it's too late, but I had to try. Your father, Jude." He folded the letter, addressed an envelope, and set it aside to mail in the morning. Whether Daniel would respond or not, at least he'd tried. Over the next few weeks, Jude threw himself into repairing the station. He replaced broken boards, fixed the windows, patched the roof. Etta and Boone proved surprisingly helpful, hauling supplies in makeshift panniers Jude rigged for them. They seemed to understand the work, to take pride in contributing. He was replacing corral rails one afternoon when a man on horseback rode up. The rider wore a sheriff's badge and had the weathered, careful look of someone who'd seen trouble and learned to be ready for it. "Afternoon," the man said, dismounting. "I'm Wade Holloway, town sheriff. Thought I'd introduce myself, see how you're settling in. Jude Kinney." They shook hands. "Settling in fine." Wade looked around at the work in progress. "Making good headway. Doc Brennan speaks well of you. He's been helpful." Wade was quiet for a moment, then said, "Doc tells me you're planning to turn this into a place for animals. A rest station of sorts? That's the idea. Animals work hard in this territory. Thought they could use a place to recover when they're worn down or injured." Wade nodded slowly. "Lost my horse a few years back. Best animal I ever had. Worked him too hard. Didn't see the signs that he was struggling until it was too late. Would have paid good money for a place like what you're describing. I'm sorry about your horse." "Me too." Wade cleared his throat. "Point is, I think it's a good idea. The town could use something like this. Just wanted you to know you've got my support. Appreciate it." Wade remounted, then paused. "One more thing. Everyone's got a past. I don't dig into people's business unless I have to. But if you're staying here, you should know the town takes care of its own. That means if you're in trouble, we help. But it also means we expect you to be straight with folks. I plan to be. Good enough for me." Wade tipped his hat and rode off. Jude went back to work on the fence, but the conversation stayed with him. The town takes care of its own. He'd been part of a community once, knew what that felt like. Maybe he could be part of one again. That evening, he carved a small whistle from a piece of wood he'd been saving. It was something he'd done years ago, made a whistle for Daniel when the boy was young. His hands remembered the work, and the whistle turned out well, producing a clear, pure tone. He tested it with Etta and Boone, using it to call them from different parts of the corral. After a few tries, they understood, responding to the whistle like it was their name. It felt good, building this communication with them, this partnership. As the sun set that evening, Jude stood on the porch of his new home, because that's what it was becoming, a home, and felt something he hadn't felt in 5 years. Not quite contentment, but close. A sense of being in the right place, doing the right thing. Clara's compass was in his pocket, warm against his hip. He pulled it out, looked at the inscription. "I'm trying, Clara," he said quietly. "I'm trying to find my way home." The compass caught the last light of day, gleaming. Somewhere in the distance, Etta brayed, and Boone answered. The sound of it made Jude smile. He was building something here. Something small but real. Something that mattered. Whatever happened next, he'd face it from solid ground. with animals who'd stood by him and a purpose that gave him reason to wake up each morning. It was enough. For now, it was more than enough. 6 weeks into his time at Redemption Springs, Jude had established a routine. Mornings were for repairs and maintenance. Afternoons, he'd walk into town, help where he could, share information about trails with travelers. Evenings he'd spend with Etta, Boone, and Rusty, tending to them, talking to them, grateful for their steady presence. The station was starting to look good. He'd repaired all the major damage, painted the barn, reinforced the corral. Word had spread about what he was doing, and a few ranchers had brought animals that needed rest. A lame mule, an old draft horse, a donkey with an infected hoof. Jude had tended them all, charged modest fees, and earned a reputation for being fair and skilled. He hadn't heard back from Daniel yet, but he tried not to let it bother him. Mail was slow out here, or maybe Daniel wasn't ready to forgive him. Either way, Jude had meant what he wrote. He was here, building something, becoming someone his wife might recognize again. It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed. Jude was in the barn, cleaning out stalls, when he heard horses approaching, multiple horses riding hard. He set down the pitchfork and walked outside, shading his eyes against the morning sun. 5 riders. The one in front was unmistakable even at a distance. Silas Polk, the trader from Bitter Creek. The man had gotten heavier in the months since Jude had last seen him, his face redder, his expression meaner. The 4 men with him looked like hired help, rough types with guns on their hips. Jude's stomach dropped. This wasn't a social visit. Polk reined in hard, his horse snorting and dancing. "There you are, you thieving son of a bitch." Jude kept his voice calm. "Polk, been a while." "Not long enough." Polk dismounted heavily. His men stayed on their horses, hands near their weapons. "I've been tracking you for months. Had to follow a dozen cold trails before I found you here, playing at being respectable. I'm not playing at anything. What do you want?" "What do I want?" Polk's voice rose. "I want my property back. Those donkeys you stole from me. I know they're here. Saw them in the corral when we rode up. I didn't steal anything. I freed them from a man who was beating them. They were mine, legally purchased. You had no right." In the corral, Etta and Boone had moved to the far corner, watching the confrontation with nervous eyes. They remembered Polk, remembered what he'd done to them. "Those animals were being mistreated," Jude said, his voice hard. "If that's legal, then the law's wrong." "The law says property is property." Polk pulled a folded paper from his jacket. "I got a bill of sale right here. Paid good money for those donkeys. You took them in the night like a common thief. I opened a gate. They chose to leave. They're animals. They don't get to choose. They belong to me, and I'm taking them back." "No," Jude said simply. "You're not." Polk's face darkened. He gestured to his men. "Get those donkeys. Load them up." 2 of the men dismounted and started toward the corral. Jude moved to block their path. "Touch those animals and you'll have a problem." One of the men, a wiry fellow with a scarred face, laughed. "You think you can stop all of us, old man?" Before Jude could answer, a voice cut through the tension. "Hold it right there." Sheriff Wade Holloway had arrived on foot, having heard the commotion from town. He walked toward them with the careful, measured pace of a man used to diffusing situations. His hand rested casually on his gun belt. "What's going on here?" Wade asked. Polk turned to him. "Sheriff, thank God. This man stole my property months ago, and I've finally tracked him down. I'm here to reclaim what's mine." Wade looked at Jude. "That true?" "I freed 2 donkeys he was beating. They followed me of their own will. I didn't steal anything." "He's lying," Polk said. "Those donkeys are valuable animals. I've got documentation." He thrust the bill of sale at Wade. Wade took the paper, studied it. "This says you purchased 2 gray donkeys from a prospector named Jim Hawthorne 6 months ago. Paid $50. "That's right," Wade looked up. "And you're saying Kinney stole them? Opened my corral gate in the middle of the night and took them. Did you report the theft at the time?" Polk hesitated. "I was busy, had business to attend to, but I've been searching for them ever since." Wade walked over to the corral, studying Etta and Boone. The donkeys pressed against the far fence, clearly agitated by Polk's presence. When Wade moved closer, they relaxed slightly but remained wary. Kinney, Wade said. These the animals in question? Yes. They seem nervous around Mr. Polk here. They have good reason to be. Wade came back, his expression thoughtful. Mr. Polk, I'm going to need to investigate this claim before any animals change hands. This is a matter for the law to settle, not vigilante justice. Investigate. Polk's voice rose. I showed you my bill of sale. They're my property. You showed me a piece of paper. But there are other considerations. Animal cruelty laws, for one. If these animals were mistreated, that changes things. I never... Polk started, but Wade cut him off. We'll have a hearing. Day after tomorrow. You'll present your evidence, Kinney will present his, and I'll make a determination based on the law and the facts. Until then, the donkeys stay with Kinney. That's not... Wade's voice turned hard. That's how it works in my town, Mr. Polk. You don't like it. You can take your complaint to the territorial court in Santa Fe. But that'll take months and cost more money than those donkeys are worth. Your choice. Polk glared at Wade, then at Jude. Fine, we'll do it your way. But those are my animals, and I'll prove it. See that you do. Hearings at 10 o'clock Thursday morning in the town hall. Don't be late. Wade turned to Jude. You neither. And keep those donkeys secure until this is settled. Polk mounted his horse with difficulty, his face purple with rage. This isn't over, Kinney. Not by a long shot. He and his men rode off, raising dust. Wade watched them go, then turned to Jude. You want to tell me what really happened? Jude told him everything. The trading post in Bitter Creek, the condition of the donkeys, the scars, the fear, the signs of systematic abuse. Opening the gate because he couldn't stand by and watch it continue. The donkeys choosing to follow him. Wade listened without interrupting. When Jude finished, the sheriff sighed. You should have reported him to the law. I was in the middle of nowhere. By the time I got to a town with a sheriff, I'd have been long gone. And Polk would have just claimed they ran off. Still would have been better than what you did. Now it looks like theft. I know. But I'd do it again. Wade studied him for a long moment. I believe you. And I believe those animals were mistreated. But Polk's got a bill of sale. That's a legal document. Makes things complicated. So what happens at the hearing? You'll need to prove he abused them. Witnesses would help. Documentation of their condition when you found them. Anything that shows he wasn't fit to own them. I don't have any of that. It was just me and them in that corral. Then you'll need to demonstrate the bond you have with them. Show that they choose you over him. Sometimes that's enough to sway a decision, especially if we can prove Polk has a history of animal mistreatment. Can you prove that? I can try. I'll send telegrams to towns between here and Bitter Creek, see if anyone knows him, has complaints on file. But Jude, Wade paused, you need to prepare yourself. Law usually sides with the property owner. If Polk's got legitimate purchase documents and you've got nothing but your word, this could go badly. Jude looked toward the corral where Etta and Boone stood watching him. They'd saved his life. He couldn't let them go back to a man who would hurt them. I won't give them up without a fight, I know. Just make sure it's the right kind of fight. Legal and by the books. Otherwise, you'll end up in jail, and the donkeys will end up with Polk anyway. Wade left and Jude walked to the corral. Etta and Boone came to him immediately, pressing their heads against his chest, seeking comfort. He wrapped his arms around them, feeling their solid warmth, their trust. I won't let him take you, Jude promised quietly. Whatever it costs, I won't let him hurt you again. But as he stood there with his animals, he felt the old fear rising. The fear of loss, the fear of failing someone who depended on him. He'd failed Clara by not being strong enough to go on without her. He'd failed Daniel by disappearing. He couldn't fail Etta and Boone, too. That evening, Jude found something while cleaning out a corner of the barn. A brass medallion, tarnished but still readable. It was a prospector's claim marker, engraved with a name, Benjamin Garrett, 1881. The man who'd built this station. The man who died here, alone, without family to claim his body or his property. Jude turned the medallion over in his hands, feeling the weight of another man's solitary life. Was that his future too? Building something, maybe even something good, but ultimately ending up alone. Or could he fight for what mattered, protect what he loved, and finally break free of the isolation he'd chosen? 2 days until the hearing. 2 days to figure out how to prove that some bonds mattered more than bills of sale. 2 days to save Etta and Boone. Jude tucked the medallion into his pocket alongside Clara's compass and went to prepare for the fight of his life. Jude spent that first night barely sleeping, his mind racing through possibilities. By dawn, he had a plan. Not a great plan, maybe, but better than nothing. First, he needed to document everything about Etta and Boone's condition when he'd found them. He wrote down every detail he could remember: the visible ribs, the overgrown hooves, the notch in Etta's ear that looked like it had been done with a knife, the scar across Boone's shoulder. He sketched rough drawings of where the marks were, how the animals had cowered when approached. Then he went into town. Doc Brennan was his first stop. The physician listened to Jude's account, then examined the donkeys himself, making careful notes. The scar tissue on Boone's shoulder is old, but consistent with repeated striking, Doc said. The notch in Etta's ear looks deliberate, possibly for identification, but done crudely. And their hooves, he lifted Etta's front foot carefully. You've done good work trimming them, but you can still see where they were badly overgrown. That's neglect, plain and simple. Will you testify to that? Of course. Next, Jude visited the general store. The owner, a woman named Martha Chen, knew everyone who passed through. Silas Polk, she said when Jude asked. I've heard that name. Trader out of Bitter Creek, right? Got a reputation for sharp dealing. A few travelers have mentioned him, not kindly. Any specifics? Martha thought for a moment. There was a family came through here about 4 months back. The father mentioned a trader in Bitter Creek who tried to sell him a lame horse, swore up and down the animal was sound. When the man refused, the trader got aggressive. I don't know if it was Polk, but the description matches. Would he testify? Long gone, I'm afraid. Heading to California. Jude made the rounds, talking to anyone who might have information. Most had nothing useful, but then he met a freighter named Dutch Hammond, a grizzled man who'd been hauling goods through these territories for 20 years. Polk? Dutch spat when he heard the name. That bastard sold me 2 mules 3 years back. Swore they were 6 years old, prime working age. Turned out they were 15 if they were a day, and one had a bad leg he'd disguised with wrapping. Cost me a week's work and good money to fix. I reported him to the marshal in Bitter Creek, but nothing came of it. Would you be willing to testify to that at a hearing? When and where? By the end of the first day, Jude had Doc Brennan's medical assessment, Martha Chen's second-hand accounts, and Dutch Hammond willing to testify about Polk's dishonest practices. It wasn't much, but it was something. That evening, Sheriff Wade stopped by the station. Got some responses to my telegrams, he said, unfolding several papers. 3 different towns have complaints on file about Silas Polk. Animal abuse in 2 cases, fraudulent sales in another. Never prosecuted, because he'd move on before the law could catch up. But it's documented. That helps. Maybe. But here's the thing, Jude. Even with all this evidence of Polk being a bad actor, he's still got a legal bill of sale. You freed animals that weren't yours to free. In the eyes of the law, that's theft, no matter how noble your intentions. So what's the point of the hearing if the law's already decided? Wade sat on the porch step, looking out at the corral where the donkeys grazed in the evening light. Because sometimes the law has room for interpretation. Sometimes a judge or a sheriff can look at the spirit of a situation, not just the letter. But you need to give me something to work with. Something that shows these animals are better off with you than with him. They saved my life. I know. You've told me. But can you prove it? Can you show the bond you have with them in a way that's undeniable? That gave Jude an idea. What if I could demonstrate that they choose me, that they respond to me, trust me, and fear him? Wade considered this. That might work, if it's clear enough, dramatic enough. Animals can't testify in court, but their behavior can speak volumes. Jude spent the next day working with Etta and Boone, using the whistle he'd carved. He'd been training them casually, but now he focused on it, building a series of commands. 1 whistle pattern meant come, 2 meant stop, 3 meant follow. The donkeys were smart, picking up the patterns quickly, but more than the commands, Jude worked on their trust. He'd sit with them for hours, talking softly, grooming them, checking their hooves, running his hands over their coats to reassure them. When Etta got spooked by a snake, he calmed her with gentle words. When Boone got his halter caught on a fence rail, Jude freed him patiently, without anger. These were things he'd been doing all along. But now he paid attention to the details, made sure every interaction reinforced the bond between them. He needed them to understand, somehow, that he was fighting for them, that he wouldn't give up. On the second day, the morning before the hearing, Jude went to collect his mail from the post office. He wasn't expecting anything, so when Martha handed him an envelope with Santa Fe in the return address, his heart nearly stopped. Daniel's handwriting. Jude walked back to the station in a daze, the letter clutched in his hand. He didn't open it until he was sitting on the porch with Etta and Boone nearby, as if he needed witnesses for whatever came next. His hands shook as he unfolded the pages. "Dear Pa," it began, and just seeing those two words made Jude's vision blur. "I got your letter." Read it 3 times, trying to figure out what to say. "I'll be honest, I was angry at first. Angry that it took you nearly dying to reach out. Angry that you disappeared for so long. Angry that you missed so much." Jude's throat tightened. He'd expected this, deserved it, but then Margaret read it too, and she said something that stuck with me. She said, "Grief makes people do strange things. Sometimes the people who love us most are the ones who hurt us most, not because they want to, but because they don't know how not to." I think she's right. I think you didn't know how to keep going after Mama died, and being around me just made it worse because I reminded you of her. I think you had to leave to survive, even if that meant leaving me behind. I'm not saying it's okay. It hurt. It still hurts. But I understand it better now. Here's what I want you to know. You have a granddaughter. Her name is Clara, after Mama. She's 3 years old, and she's the light of our lives. She asks about her grandpa sometimes because Margaret's father visits. And she wonders why she only has one grandfather. I'd like her to have 2. If you're serious about staying put, about building something there in Redemption Springs, then maybe we could visit. Maybe in a month or so, when Margaret can get time off from teaching. I'm not promising everything will be fixed between us, but I'm willing to try if you are. Your son, Daniel. P.S. Mama would be proud of what you're doing with the animal sanctuary. She always said you had a gift for understanding creatures that others gave up on. Jude had to stop reading. He set the letter down and covered his face with his hands, shoulders shaking. For 5 years he'd held it together, held everything in, never letting himself feel the full weight of what he'd lost and thrown away. Now it came flooding out. The grief, the regret, the desperate hope that maybe it wasn't too late. Etta approached, pressing her nose against his arm. Boone stood close, a solid presence. They'd seen him week before in the desert and hadn't judged him. They didn't judge him now. When Jude could speak again, he looked at the donkeys through tear-blurred eyes. "I'm going to meet my granddaughter," he said, his voice rough. "Clara, named after her grandmother. Daniel's willing to try again." The donkeys listened, ears forward, as if they understood the importance of the moment. "But first," Jude continued, "we've got to win tomorrow. Got to make sure you two stay safe. Because if Daniel's coming in a month with his family, I want you to meet them. Want young Clara to see what real loyalty looks like." He spent the rest of that day preparing. Practiced the whistle commands again. Made sure the donkeys were groomed and healthy-looking. Reviewed his notes and the evidence he'd gathered. Talked through what he'd say to Wade and the town council members who would serve as a kind of jury. That evening, Doc Brennan stopped by with food. A pot of stew, fresh bread. "Figured you might not have time to cook," Doc said. "Need to keep your strength up for tomorrow." They ate together on the porch, watching the sun set. "You nervous?" Doc asked, terrified. "Good. Means you care about the outcome. That'll come through tomorrow. What if it's not enough? What if the law sides with Polk?" Doc was quiet for a moment. "Then we'll figure out Plan B, but let's worry about that if it happens. Right now, focus on making the best case you can. Show them why these animals belong with you. Show them what you've built here and what you're trying to build. After Doc left, Jude sat with the letter from Daniel, reading it again by lamplight. The words gave him strength, reminded him what he was fighting for. Not just Etta and Boone, but the chance to be the man his wife had believed he could be. The grandfather, his son, was willing to let into his daughter's life. The person who didn't give up on things that mattered. He pulled out Clara's compass, the brass medallion from the prospector, and now Daniel's letter. 3 artifacts, 3 reminders of what he'd lost and what he might still save. Tomorrow would decide a lot of things. The fate of 2 donkeys who'd saved his life. The viability of his sanctuary. His standing in this town. Maybe even his future with his family. Jude didn't sleep much that night. But when dawn came, he was ready as he'd ever be. The town hall was fuller than Jude expected. Word had spread about the hearing, and it seemed like half of Redemption Springs had shown up to watch. People filled the benches, lined the walls, crowded near the doors. Some were curious. Some genuinely cared about the outcome. All of them made Jude nervous. He sat at a table near the front, his hat in his hands, his heart hammering against his ribs. On the chain around his neck, hidden under his shirt, Clara's wedding ring rested against his chest. He touched it through the fabric, drawing strength from the memory of her. Sheriff Wade stood at the front of the room, calling the hearing to order. Beside him sat 3 town council members who would help make the final decision. Banker Stevens, Doc Brennan, and a rancher named Samuel Ward. Silas Polk sat at a table opposite Jude, looking smug and confident. This is a hearing to determine ownership of 2 donkeys, currently in the care of Jude Kinney, Wade announced. Mr. Polk claims they were stolen from him. Mr. Kinney claims he freed them from abuse. We'll hear evidence from both sides and make a determination based on the law and the facts. Mr. Polk, you're the claimant. Present your case. Polk stood, smoothing his vest. He'd cleaned up for the occasion, but there was still a mean edge to him that no amount of soap could wash away. This is simple, Polk began. I legally purchased 2 gray donkeys from a prospector named Jim Hawthorne 6 months ago. Paid $50, which I can prove. He placed the bill of sale on the table. The donkeys were my property, kept in my corral in Bitter Creek. On the night of June 14th, this man, he pointed at Jude, broke into my corral and stole them. I've been searching for them ever since, and I finally found them here. Did you report the theft at the time? Wade asked. I was traveling for business. By the time I got back and discovered they were gone, Kinney had a week's head start. But I never stopped looking. What proof do you have that Mr. Kinney took them? He admitted it himself, day before yesterday, right in front of you, Sheriff. Said he opened my gate and let them out. Wade nodded. Mr. Kinney, is that true? Jude stood. His legs felt unsteady. I opened the gate. But I didn't steal them. I gave them a choice. Animals don't have choices, Polk sneered. They're property, and property law is clear. Let's hear from witnesses, Wade said. Mr. Polk, do you have anyone who can corroborate your story? Polk gestured to one of his men, the wiry fellow with the scarred face. Jake here worked for me back in Bitter Creek. He saw the donkeys in my corral before they disappeared. Jake stood awkwardly.
Yeah, that's right.
2 gray donkeys. They were there one day, gone the next? And did you see Mr. Kinney take them? No, but who else would have done it? Thank you, Wade said. You can sit. Any other witnesses? Polk shook his head. Don't need any. Got the bill of sale right there? That's all the proof the law requires. Wade turned to Jude. Your turn. Present your case. Jude took a breath, touching the wedding ring through his shirt one more time. I did open Polk's gate. I won't deny that. But I did it because those animals were being abused. They were starved, beaten, neglected. I couldn't stand by and watch it happen. That's a lie, Polk said hotly. You'll get your chance to respond, Wade cut him off. Mr. Kinney, continue. I have witnesses who can speak to Polk's character and his history of animal abuse. I also have medical evidence about the condition of those donkeys and the bond we've built. Call your first witness. Doc Brennan stood and came forward. He testified about examining Etta and Boone, describing the old injuries, the signs of neglect, the fear they'd shown when Polk appeared 2 days ago. In my professional opinion, Doc concluded, Those animals were systematically mistreated over a period of months. The physical evidence is clear. Next came Dutch Hammond, the freighter. He told his story about the lame mules Polk had sold him, the lies, the financial loss. "Man's got no conscience when it comes to animals," Dutch said. "Sees them as money, nothing more." Then Wade read the complaints from other towns, 3 separate incidents of animal abuse or fraudulent sales, all tied to Silas Polk. By the time the testimony was done, people in the hall were murmuring. Polk's face had gone red, and he was whispering furiously to Jake. "Mr. Polk," Wade said, "do you want to respond to these accusations?" Polk stood, his voice loud. "These are lies and rumors, all complaints from people with grudges. I've never been convicted of anything. And even if every word was true, it doesn't change the fact that I own those donkeys legally. The law is the law." He was right, and everyone in the room knew it. No matter how much evidence of bad character Jude presented, Polk had a legal bill of sale. Property was property. Jude saw the doubt on some faces in the crowd, saw the council members exchanging glances. This wasn't going well. Wade seemed to sense it too. "Mr. Kinney, do you have anything else?" This was it, the moment everything hinged on. "I do," Jude said, standing. "I'd like to demonstrate the relationship between me and those donkeys, show how they respond to me versus how they respond to Polk." Wade considered this. "That's unusual, but I'll allow it. We'll take a recess and reconvene outside at the corral. Bring the donkeys." The entire crowd moved outside, forming a loose circle around the corral at Jude's station. Etta and Boone stood in the center, alert and nervous, with so many people watching. Jude could see the tension in their bodies, the way their ears swiveled, tracking every sound and movement. Wade stood at the fence. "Mr. Kinney, show us what you mean about the bond you share with these animals." Jude climbed over the fence, moving slowly and deliberately. He pulled out the wooden whistle he'd carved, the one he'd spent days teaching them to respond to. His hands were shaking, but he took a breath and steadied himself. He blew one short note. Etta's head came up immediately. Boone's ears pricked forward. Jude whistled again, and both donkeys moved toward him, not hesitantly but with purpose. They came right up to him, Etta pressing her nose against his chest, Boone standing close enough to touch. Jude ran his hands over their necks, speaking softly. "Good girl, Etta. Good boy, Boone. You're safe. I've got you." Then he stepped back and blew 3 short notes in succession. The donkeys followed him as he walked across the corral. He stopped and they stopped. He turned and they turned with him. It wasn't perfect. These weren't trained circus animals, but the trust was evident. The connection was real now, Jude said, addressing Wade but speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm going to show you something else." He walked to the far end of the corral and climbed out, moving away from the donkeys. They watched him go, uncertain. He moved 30 feet away, behind several people in the crowd, out of their direct line of sight. Then he blew the whistle again. One long note. Etta and Boone immediately moved toward the sound, pushing through the crowd carefully but determinedly, searching for Jude. When they found him, they pressed against him, clearly relieved. Several people in the crowd murmured appreciatively. "That's trust," Jude said. "That's a bond that goes both ways. I freed them from a bad situation, and they saved my life in the desert. We take care of each other." Doc Brennan was nodding. Even Banker Stevens looked impressed. Wade's expression was carefully neutral, but Jude thought he saw approval in the sheriff's eyes. "Mr. Polk," Wade said, "would you like to demonstrate your relationship with these animals?" Polk's face twisted. "They're work animals. They don't need to do tricks. They just need to obey. Then show us they recognize you as their owner. Show us they respond to your commands." Polk climbed into the corral, and the change in the donkeys was immediate. Etta's ears went back flat against her head. Boone shifted nervously, moving away. When Polk approached, both animals retreated to the far corner, bodies tense, ready to bolt or fight. "Come here," Polk commanded, his voice hard. The donkeys didn't move. "I said come here." He took several steps forward. Etta brayed, a sound of distress, and Boone positioned himself between Polk and the Jenny, protective. When Polk reached out toward them, Boone lowered his head and showed his teeth, a clear warning. "Damn stubborn animals," Polk muttered. He lunged forward, trying to grab Etta's halter. The Jenny dodged, nimble despite her size, and Boone kicked out, not quite connecting but close enough that Polk had to jump back. The crowd gasped. Several people exchanged significant looks. "That's because they're not trained properly," Polk said, his face red with anger and embarrassment. "They need a firm hand, need to learn respect. They learned something from you, all right," Doc Brennan called out. "They learned to be afraid." Wade raised a hand for quiet. "I've seen enough. Council, if you join me for a moment." Wade, Doc Brennan, Stevens, and Ward moved away from the crowd, conferring in low voices. Jude watched them, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. Beside him, Etta and Boone pressed close, as if they understood their fate was being decided. The weight felt endless. Jude's mind raced through possibilities, through contingencies, through what he'd do if they ruled against him. He couldn't let Polk take these animals, couldn't watch them be dragged back into abuse and cruelty. But what choice would he have? Finally, Wade and the council members returned. The sheriff's face was serious as he addressed the crowd. "This has been an unusual case," Wade began. "The law typically sides with documented ownership, and Mr. Polk does have a valid bill of sale. However, the law also recognizes that animals are not mere objects. They're living creatures, and their welfare matters." Jude's pulse thundered in his ears. "We've heard testimony about Mr. Polk's treatment of animals," Wade continued. "We've seen documented complaints from multiple jurisdictions. We've observed how these donkeys respond to him versus how they respond to Mr. Kinney. And we've considered the fact that Mr. Kinney has built a sanctuary here, a place dedicated to the care and welfare of working animals." Wade paused, looking directly at Polk. "Mr. Polk, based on the evidence presented and the animal's clear preference for Mr. Kinney's care, this council rules that the donkeys remain with Mr. Kinney. Your bill of sale is legitimate, but your treatment of these animals violated basic standards of animal welfare. Consider the purchase price a loss, and consider yourself fortunate you're not being charged with animal cruelty." The crowd erupted in approval. Jude felt his knees go weak with relief. He grabbed the fence rail to steady himself and felt Etta's nose press against his back, Boone's solid warmth beside him. Polk's face went purple. "This is outrageous. You can't just—" "I can and I have," Wade said firmly. "If you want to appeal, take it to territorial court. But I'm telling you now, you won't win. Now get out of my town before I find a reason to lock you up." Polk stood there, fists clenched, rage radiating off him. For a moment, Jude thought the man might do something stupid. But finally, Polk spun on his heel and stalked toward his horse. His men followed, and within minutes they were riding out, leaving dust and angry mutters behind them. The crowd closed around Jude, offering congratulations, patting his shoulder, praising the decision. Doc Brennan was grinning. Wade caught Jude's eye and nodded, a simple acknowledgement that justice, rough and imperfect as it was, had been served. Through it all, Etta and Boone stayed close to Jude, calm now that the threat had passed. He kept one hand on each of them, anchoring himself to their solid presence, letting the relief wash over him in waves. They were safe. They were his, and he was theirs. Home wasn't just a place. It was standing right here, in a corral surrounded by people who'd become community, with two donkeys who'd saved his life and whom he'd just saved in return. Clara would have understood that. She'd always known what home really meant. 3 months had passed since the hearing, and autumn had come to Redemption Springs. The air carried a crispness that made the animals frisky and the work easier. The cottonwoods along the creek had turned gold, and the sky seemed impossibly blue against the changing leaves. Jude stood at the entrance to his property, hammering the last nail into a wooden sign. He stepped back to admire his work. The letters were painted in neat, careful strokes. Kinney's Rest, where no creature gets left behind. It had taken him a week to make the sign, working on it in the evenings after his daily tasks were done. Several townspeople had offered to help with the painting, and the final result was better than he could have managed alone. The sign represented something official, something permanent. This wasn't just a temporary arrangement anymore. This was home. The sanctuary had grown beyond his expectations. After word spread about the hearing and Jude's victory over Poke, people started bringing animals that needed care. An old plough horse with arthritis that his owner could no longer work but couldn't bear to put down. A mule with a healing leg injury. 3 donkeys from a ranch whose owner had died, leaving them without a home. Even a goat that had been found wandering the desert, half-starved and sun-sick. Jude tended them all. Fed them, treated their injuries, gave them time to rest and recover. Some would eventually go to new homes. Others would stay here permanently. All of them would be safe and cared for. The Prospector Station had been transformed. Fresh paint on the buildings, new fencing, a proper feed storage area, and a small bunkhouse Jude had built for himself, leaving the main building as a treatment area and stable. It looked like a real operation now, professional and purposeful, but Jude barely noticed the physical changes as he stood there with his new sign. His attention was fixed on the road leading into town, watching for a specific wagon. Daniel had written 2 weeks ago, saying they'd arrive today, weather permitting. Late afternoon, probably, after the heat of the day had passed. Jude had been nervous for days, cleaning constantly, making sure everything was perfect, worrying about what Daniel would think, what his granddaughter would think, whether 5 years of absence could be bridged by a few letters and good intentions. Etta wandered over, curious about what he was doing. Boone followed, as he always did. The 2 donkeys had become minor celebrities in town after the hearing. People stopped by regularly just to see them, to hear the story of how they'd saved Jude in the desert. Children loved them, and Etta and Boone had proven remarkably patient with small hands and excited voices. "They'll be here soon," Jude told the donkeys, running his hand along Etta's neck. "My son, my daughter-in-law, my granddaughter, your granddaughter too, in a way. Family." The word still felt strange in his mouth after so long, but it felt right too. Like something he'd lost and found again. Movement on the road caught his eye. A wagon, drawn by 2 horses, coming toward the sanctuary at an easy pace. Jude's heart began to race. He wiped his palms on his pants, suddenly aware of how weathered he looked, how much older he must seem. The wagon pulled up, and Daniel was climbing down before it had fully stopped. He was 37 now, Jude realized with a shock. A grown man, not the boy Jude remembered. He had Clara's eyes and his father's build, and he moved with the confidence of someone who'd found his place in the world. For a moment, father and son just looked at each other. 5 years of silence stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Then Daniel crossed the distance and pulled Jude into a hard embrace. "Pa," was all he said, but it was enough. Jude hugged his son, feeling the solid reality of him, and had to fight to keep his composure. "I'm sorry," he managed. "For everything. For disappearing. I know," Daniel said quietly. "We'll talk about it. But right now, there's someone who wants to meet you." A woman had climbed down from the wagon, Margaret, Jude assumed. She had a kind face and knowing eyes. She lifted a small girl from the wagon, setting her carefully on the ground. The child was tiny, maybe 3.5 years old, with dark curls and Clara's smile. She wore a blue dress and held a cloth doll. She looked at Jude with frank curiosity, no fear, just interest. "Clara," Margaret said gently, "this is your grandfather. Your Grandpa Jude." The little girl studied him for a long moment. Then she noticed Etta and Boone standing nearby, and her whole face lit up. "Donkeys!" Before anyone could stop her, she was running toward them, arms outstretched. Jude started to move, worried, but Etta lowered her head and let the child throw her arms around the donkey's neck. Boone stood close, protective, gentle. They'd been through so much, these 2 animals, but they knew innocence when they saw it. New kindness. Young Clara laughed, a sound like bells, and Jude felt something crack wide open in his chest, the last of the armor he'd built around his heart, finally breaking apart. Daniel came to stand beside him, watching his daughter with the donkeys. "She's been talking about the animals non-stop since we told her we were coming. About her grandfather, who has a special place for creatures that need help. They're good with children," Jude said, his voice rough. "Patient." "She looks like Mama," Daniel said quietly. "She does." They stood there together, watching the little girl who carried Clara's name and spirit, who represented the future Jude, had almost thrown away. Margaret joined them, and Jude saw in her eyes the same forgiveness Daniel had shown. They were giving him a chance, this family. A chance he didn't deserve, but would work every day to earn. Would you like to see the sanctuary? Jude asked. It's not much yet, but we'd love to, Margaret said warmly. They walked the property together, Jude explaining his plans, pointing out the different animals and their stories. Young Clara held his hand, chattering about the donkeys, asking endless questions in the way children do. Her small hand in his felt like a miracle, a second chance he'd never expected. That evening they sat on the porch as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. The animals grazed peacefully in the corral. Daniel and Margaret shared stories about their life in Santa Fe, about Daniel's veterinary practice, about Clara's personality and antics. Jude listened, adding his own stories about the sanctuary, about the hearing, about how 2 donkeys had given him back his life. As darkness fell and young Clara drowsed against her mother's shoulder, Daniel said, "We were thinking of staying a week. If that's all right. Margaret wants to help you organize the medical supplies, and I'd like to examine some of the animals, make sure they're getting proper care." "I'd like that," Jude said. Then, because it needed to be said, "I missed so much. Your life, your family. I can't get those years back." "No," Daniel agreed. "But we've got years ahead. That's what matters now." Later, after his family had settled into a room Doc Brennan had arranged at the boarding house in town, Jude sat alone on his porch with Etta and Boone lying nearby. He pulled out Clara's compass, looked at the words engraved there, "Find your way home." He'd finally done it. Not by going back to what was lost, but by building something new. By learning that home wasn't a fixed place or a perfect past. It was connection. It was purpose. It was showing up for the ones who depended on you, whether they had 2 legs or 4. In his pocket, alongside the compass, was the brass medallion from the prospector who died alone. Jude had kept it as a reminder of what his life could have become. Now it reminded him of what he'd escaped, what he'd chosen instead. He looked at his sanctuary, his animals resting, his sign proclaiming his purpose, his son planning to return tomorrow with his family. This was legacy. This was meaning. This was home. Etta brayed softly, and Jude smiled. "I know, girl, I know. We did good, didn't we? All of us together." The desert wind carried the scent of sage and possibility. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. The sanctuary settled into its evening rhythms, every creature safe, every creature cared for. No one got left behind here, not anymore, not ever again.